My name's David Wise.
I'm Cortland George.
And we are MFG, a multidisciplinary design studio focusing on brand strategy and design. And this is the third installment, first lecture of this year's Ellipsis Lecture Series. We have alumni Zak on the call who gave a lecture last year. Great lecture in person on YouTube if you haven't seen it. But we're kicking this year off with Mark Owens. I'm not going to give too much of an introduction. He's going to take us through almost his entire career in an hour or so, depending on how many slides he has now. But an amazing, talented writer, designer, thinker. Yeah, so take it from here, Mark.
Hey, thanks, David, for inviting me. I'm gonna, Zak, I watched Zak's lecture live on the internet and enjoyed it thoroughly. So very pleased to be here. And as David mentioned, I have like a lot of slides, and my idea is to say very little and like go through like a bunch of slides. You guys tell me, can you see this? You see that? Yes, no?
We still just see your Zoom screen.
Okay, I'm stopping sharing. It gave me a weird, we troubleshooted this too.
Yeah, sure.
Here we go. Here we go, window, got it. There was not an additional window. All right, here we go. Here we go. So can you see this?
Yep, that's working.
So I like to start with this like little anecdote around from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is a favorite movie of mine, but I also sort of understand as like a kind of postmodern fable in a way, or it's like a modernism, postmodernism dialectic movie, which is like Ferris Bueller is the ludic, postmodern, free spirit, and then his best friend Cameron is the like who lives in this modernist house and is very very depressed. They're kind of like the yin and the yang. There's even some speculation that it's like it's kind of Fight Club style, like they're really one person. But that's a larger lecture which I won't give today. But I do want to show this this little moment from Ferris Bueller as kind of a preamble. And then I'll get into the lecture. So this is a favorite scene.
What is so dangerous about a character like Ferris Bueller is he gives good kids bad ideas. Last thing I need at this point in my career is 1,500 Ferris Bueller disciples running around these halls. He jeopardizes my ability to effectively govern this student body.
Well, makes you look like an ass is what he does, Ed.
Thank you, Grace. I think you're wrong.
Oh, well, he's very popular, Ed. The sportos, the motorheads, geeks, sluts, bloods, wastoids, dweebies, dickheads, they all adore him. They think he's a righteous dude.
So, one of the reasons I like that as a way to start is every time you're asked to do a lecture, there's this sort of supposition that you're like some sort of example, or maybe there's like something exemplary about your practice. So I think I appreciate that clip because it's both sort of a caution, which is to say maybe my particular journey through graphic design is not terribly exemplary. In fact, it might be a one-way ticket to nowhere. But then I also sort of like this list that Grace gives: the sportos, the motorheads, the geeks, sluts, bloods, wastoids, dweebies, and dickheads, which is maybe this lecture is for that particular audience. So I want to start by just talking a little bit about the Walker Art Center, which is where I'm sitting right now. About almost 2 years ago, I started as design director at the Walker Art Center, taking over for Emmett Byrne, who'd been here for a very long time. And before that, Andrew Blauvelt, who was design director before. And for those of you who don't know, the Walker is an art center in Minneapolis. It's both a contemporary art museum, a cinema, a theater. They have a really well-known teen program and programs for families. It's located right in the middle of Minneapolis. 19-acre campus with a beautiful free sculpture garden. One of the reasons you might know the Walker is because it has a very long design history. Starting in the 40s with the Everyday Art Quarterly, which was the first design journal ever published by a museum, and then which became Design Quarterly, which ran into the through the 90s into the 2000s, and was really like, you know, a who's who of like design discourse, really from the 50s through the 90s. And we have an amazing archive here of all the issues of Design Quarterly. Some of you may know the famous April Greiman 1984 collage at the bottom here, which is in the MoMA collection, which came out of Design Quarterly. So that's in every design history book. And then on the top right is the Walker typeface that was designed by Matthew Carter in 1995, which is also in the MoMA collection, which at the time was a very sort of you know, leading, cutting edge sort of snap-on typeface, which is still part of the Walker identity. You'll also maybe know the Walker from the design exhibitions that happen, you know, roughly every 3 or 4 years. Very unique for a museum. The design department is also a curatorial department. We're also a programming department. So graphic design now in production, still in many people's shelves. I actually had work in this. Some of my peers in the field were in this. This is now over 10 years old. This is a show which included, you know, work by Meta Haven and many others. Hippie Modernism, which is a big show curated by Andrew Bovell, which was also very, very popular, which has this incredible book. And some people may know that exhibition. And then more recently, you know, around 2020, they did Designs for Different Futures, which is an exhibition kind of about speculative design, but also a little bit about utopian thinking and materials. And then if you don't know those, you may also know the Insights Design Lecture Series, which has been running for many years, since the 80s, which is a yearly curated series of design talks that happens every March, that the design director and the team here curate. And it's really a who's who, a clearinghouse of like, and just incredible design lectures. This past year, you know, we had Leela Taylor and Alex Lynn and Dia Studio. I also invited Group EE and We Should Do It All the year before. So I've begun to help curate these. And then for many, many years, the Walker has had a very active design blog, which is the studio writes for. Some of you may know Ben Schwartz's series on bootlegging that began on the Walker blog and has now just very recently been published as Unlicensed Bootlegging as Creative Practice. I actually have an interview in this. And so, you know, that's just a snapshot of kind of where I'm at currently and why you might know the Walker. I'm going to come back at the end of the talk and just mention a little more about like what I've been up to lately at the Walker. The other thing you might know, which is the last thing I'll show here at the beginning, in November of last year, we launched Idea House 3, which is a new sort of concept store at the Walker Arts Center, which is both a design shop and a bookshop and a programming space. Zak Group out of London did the spatial design and the identity. And then our team in-house at the Walker worked on all the ancillary materials. I'll just, you know, I'll talk more at the end about my team and the structure at the Walker currently, but I did want to also show this since it's a very new initiative. So this is kind of the second beginning of the talk, which is I always like to show this as a kind of self-portrait. This is me putting on a cut and sew sweatshirt I designed some years ago for Six Pack France. I like this because it's both kind of color blocked and designy, but it's also a little bit like about the struggle of design in a way. And then I also like to show this, which is a poster that I designed for the Korean magazine Graphic. They did a poster issue. They asked you to kind of do anything, and I poached this partial quote from a Jean-Luc Godard movie, La Chinoise, vague ideas with clear images. And I think this has become a little bit of a like motif, kind of in the way that I think about my work, which is I have a certain clarity in my work. I like to have very, very, very approachable and very clear sort of form. But I am a thinker. I am a writer. And so I think I try to sort of encode like layers into the work. So this sort of butchered Godard phrase, vague ideas with clear images, sort of captures maybe something of the work. I want to start out, I think more in recent years, maybe the past 10 years, a little more, I've become like more known for book design, I guess, because I've been, moving more in the art world. My partner's a curator. I started really designing stuff for the art world maybe around 2010. And so I want to show this as kind of what I'll talk about. I'm going to kind of go through some book projects as kind of the centerpiece. But, I did want to talk about like kind of what I was doing before. So I graduated from Yale with my MFA in the early 2000s. Before that, I had actually done almost a PhD in English. And when I was starting out, I did kind of everything that first 5 years in New York. And some of the things that I did that sort of got traction were sort of like concept brand, like t-shirt kind of stuff. And so this was a shirt I designed with Kevin Carney, which like at a month after we designed it, like someone emailed us a picture of like Daft Punk wearing it. So this was kind of the world I was in for a little while, like this kind of stuff, like very like kind of streetwear, kind of concept brand stuff. I also worked at Viacom and did motion graphics. So I had a very eclectic like entry into the field. I really did everything. But at the same time I was doing that, and some people will know this, I started really early writing for ... magazine, which existed for exactly a decade, sort of starting in 2000, ending in 2010. So some of the essays I wrote for ... became kind of syllabi go-to essays. One that people still read a lot is called Graphics Incognito, and this is a spread of that, which sort of traces a kind of uncanny history of modernism through like hardcore punk and Black Flag and MIT and Muriel Cooper. I also had studied Renaissance studies, and so I did very eclectic things like an interview with Randall McLeod, who is a bibliographic scholar who uses a special contraption to look at like multiple copies of books and trace typographic variations in books. And then just to kind of fast forward and encapsulate that period, almost became its own world in and of itself. The editors, David Reinfurt, who was a classmate of mine, and Stuart Bailey, really shepherded that editorial project, and it became like its own sort of traveling collection and has an exhibition really attached to it. So I think, that's an interesting feature of this like ... project, is that it kind of ended up being its own world of loosely associated people, thinkers, designers. Alongside all of this, I kind of had a returning gig as a critic at Yale. So I throw this in here to just talk about my time doing that. The sweatshirt on the left is a bootleg sweatshirt I made in 2020 for the lost COVID class, and worked with some of my classmates to sort of make a gift for that class who kind of lost a bunch of time. But the graphic issue on the right includes an interview with me and Andrew Lister, who does Brick from the Kiln, who I worked with and is a dear friend, and another one of these. This has been a very productive sort of sideline to my studio practice, is going back and having dialogue with students. Some will also know Forms of Inquiry, which was an exhibition I worked on with Zak Kyes in 2008, touring through 2008, which became a kind of interesting talking point, was an early attempt to sort of talk about extended studio practice, pulled together kind of a loose group of who we thought were kind of related. It's a little bit related to paper architecture, but it had an exhibition that traveled, that also, produced lectures and had things that spun out of it. So I think this is still something that people like refer to and think about. And I think many of the people in this exhibition are still doing amazing work. So, and of course, Zak has his own studio in London. So it's a little bit like, I sort of think of it as like having a foster child or something. Like Zak and I are like parents to this thing that like continues to grow and have a life and be referred to. And then lastly, this is kind of the second preamble, some people may know my writing for Experimental Jetset Statement and Counterstatement, where I wrote kind of like one of the introductory essays about power trios. And I'll just say, you know, Jetset have been friends for a very long time. And I feel a real affinity with them, both as designers and as people. It was very intimidating and, you know, to think about writing about them. And so the way I kind of got around that is like, it's a love letter to them without talking about them through many of my favorite things. So it's really a catalog of some of my favorite bands, but if you put all the things I write together, it sort of is also a portrait of Jetset. So I think if you're to read anything that's some of my most personal writing without being like personal, it would be something like this. And then finally, for this preamble, I just show a little selection of syllabi. You know, I supplemented my studio practice before I was at the Walker by teaching at Cal Arts for many years, at University of Pennsylvania, workshops at RISD, workshops at Yale, UIC, like many VCU. I love all the people there. So this is just here to stand in for like teaching practice. I will say I was very proud of my syllabi, which I'm happy to share, which included classes on time travel, surfaces, end times. I always had really shopkeeping. I had really fun time teaching these sort of advanced seminar classes. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go through some favorite projects from like roughly the last decade, talk hopefully briskly about them, and leave time at the end to talk a little more about Walker and just leave it open for questions. I start with this project, which was Excursus, which I lived in Philadelphia for 10 years and worked off and on with the ICA there. My partner was a curator there and sort of helped out with projects in a really uneven way. Other means were doing the identity and did incredible work there. But this was a project we called Excursus, which was like a kind of 4-part programmed space on the terrace, and it got this sort of Riso printed identity that changed with every new group, and had this sort of diagrammatic logo, art, archive, design, conversation as a kind of overarching identity. I'll just show you a little bit of it. We had a Riso. This was in the Riso Vogue, and so it was quite nice because it was adjacent to a university, so you could literally throw a flyer up and get like 50 people to show up. So there was a whole series of broadsides that were created for it. And then the space changed. So I can talk more about this, but it was really nice. Primary Information were involved, Ooga Booga, Karma Bookshop did one, and Andy Beach as well. So it was very nice to sort of be in dialogue with this, not only the curators, but with the makers that, you know, were kind of working in these spaces that were like more discursive or interstitial to the gallery. We, you know, used Martino Gamper stools, and, you know, the whole design was a really fun part of this. This is going to 2013, 2014, so really exactly a decade ago. This was really like when I got thrown in the deep end with the sort of art world and bookmaking. This is the catalog for the 2014 Whitney Biennial, which was the last one to appear in the old building, Park Avenue in New York, which is this brutalist, you know, Marcel Breuer building. So, you know, I worked with Giselle Voigiani, who's a recent graduate at the time, and we sort of wrapped the book in these rubbings directly from the building. So it was like a short, fat book that kind of like stood in for the building itself, which was now being like left behind. And this was also when Experimental Jetset rolled out their identity, which is now 10 years old. And so it was an interesting moment where like the book was kind of a fulcrum from like a very material mode of working as the museum moved to a new building and then adopted a new identity. And so it was just very interesting to be, and it was 3 curators. It was quite one of these quite rangy shows. So this was again, I don't know that this is an entirely successful project as a book, but it certainly was a very enriching one, and pushed me sort of into a more direct engagement with, you know, art catalogs and that kind of thing in museums. This is another ICA project that was one of these labors of love, JRP monograph for the artist Barbara Kasten, who's now well into her 80s. And I'll just show a quick clip, who is a kind of pioneer of stage photography. It just had a really incredible career, and this book and exhibition really worked to kind of recontextualize Barbara's work. And in a lesson for all of us, later in her career, she's had like an incredible past like 10 or 15 years. She's making some of the best work of her life. She's been included in lots of different exhibitions. So this book was really not only a close collaboration. I designed it with Neelis Anderson, and had a great time working very closely with Barbara, but it sort of reoriented the critical reception of her work. And you can see a quick snapshot like this, a Barbara image on the left, but you also have an Isosaki like architectural image, and then Gordon Matta Clark on the right. So all of a sudden these you get a visual argument before you even like read it. And so one of the things I love about this book is it really managed to not only recalibrate sort of critical discourse, but also like really be true to the work of the artist. This is another favorite spread where you get like Gita Quinte and Paul Outerbridge like in conversation with Barbara, which is just like very satisfying to create things like this. And then the book itself is just a document of both of the exhibition and of her work. I'll just note for book designers out there, the big move here is like nothing is sitting in the center. So like her compositions, everything is like a little bit straining the edge of the page. So we have this sort of unsteady compositional strategy where things are kind of almost flying off the page. This is another close collaboration with an artist that I like to show because it sort of shows the way the book object has worked in my more recent practice, where it sort of doesn't, we often think of the book as a resting place or a stopping point, a documentation. And this is a situation where the book becomes a kind of starting point. And so this is Auto Body Collision, which is a artist monograph working with the Carnegie Museum with Shannon Ebner, who's a photographer who at the time was living in LA and works very much with space and language. This is some of Shannon's work just so you can get a sense. Photography, found typography, language, also works in kind of more installation and sculptural scale. And the project began like this, which was a studio visit with Shannon, a bunch of images. This was also a collaboration with Neelis when he was working with me. We flew out to LA, had a studio visit, and you have to imagine this book began as like a bunch of text files and a bunch of image files on a hard drive. And what we basically did is Auto Body Collision, which is ABC. But we basically created this typeface, which is called Helvetica Autospaced, which is just a very slightly modified version of Helvetica Monospaced, run into a very rigorous grid. We kind of trimmed off like the horizontals on the eye and all the little things that like stick out. And so the book itself is kind of a machine. It's just this very simple grid and image content and alphabetic content. The words just get poured through the system. So you get these spreads that are sort of automated to a degree. So you have spreads like this where there's like letters and images are just in a substitutive relationship, like one-to-one. And then you get other moments where, the language itself becomes sort of like occupies the space and flows through. These are all found language from auto body collision shops. So Motor City Auto and Collision would be like the name of a auto body shop. But then you have spreads like this where like image content sort of lives in the grid in a different way. I love these spreads because we also like just typeset lists. And this is where you start to see really how beautiful and weird the typeface becomes, because since it's monospace, like the eyes float in this like very strange relationship to the other typefaces. And I think we loved this machinic quality to it. It had an agency that wasn't really like designed in quite the same way that we think of. And then, image content could live in it sort of unadorned as well. So I think this was like a very fun project for us. And what was also very gratifying is Shannon asked me to write something for it. So I ended up writing an essay kind of about the vexed question of the origins of Times New Roman. So this is also a favorite essay of mine, which sits very much to the side of, is very related but to Shannon's work, but isn't really Shannon's work, about her work, but I really love this essay. And then we did some other things, like this is a poster we made for the book release that was like done with like an automated computer program. And then the spreads from the book, which this is the other thing I love about it. This is using some Cornell Winland A's that we borrowed from Cornell, and did this. But then this spread, like these spreads show up in like a later book that Julia Bourne designed with Shannon. And so the book didn't stop on the page, like bits of the book like ended up in other books, and then Shannon actually made artwork like out of the book. So the piece on the left is like taken from the book and becomes like a wall work, and then the picture on the cover was obviously a work as well. And then in more recent years, Shannon has continued to use Helvetica Autospace and has now developed it into this like wet letter alphabet. And so these are very much more recent images. And actually SourceType, you're like working with Shannon to develop it into like a typeface. So it comes full circle from like our project, back into the artist's practice. This is just a quick overview of a curatorial project. In 2016, I was invited by SUNY Purchase to teach a seminar and also curate a show. And I taught a seminar around the Jacques Rancière essay, The Surface of Design. And so it included, and I encourage everyone to read that essay, but it included a mix of like historical objects and contemporary designers. It was basically sort of a syllabus in real time in 3D space. So it included, like on the top left is like a fragment of a project by Our Polite Society, like a selection of Corey Archangel's Fuck Negativity, Archangel Surfwear. There was a Karl Martin's wall graphic, but it also included, this is a little bit, it was just in the student, the art, the gallery space there at SUNY Purchase, but it included like a Maureen Morin posters. And then, we included like, an iBodega, like 3D printed vase alongside like a Peter Behrens like teapot, from the Verkbund, and like, a Venturi Scott Brown chair with like a Metahaven video. So it was really fun. And this was all done very seat of the pants. Like I bundled this Venturi Scott Brown chair into my Prius in a moving blanket and took it to SUNY Purchase and borrowed it like directly from the Venturis who were in, the Venturi studio, which was in Philly. So this was an incredible project. Happy to talk about it more, but I think these curatorial and writing projects sort of teed up like some of what I'm doing at the Walker now. Also want to talk about briefly Facet Model, which is an amazing book. I encourage everyone to buy. This was created by Our Polite Society, so like spun out of my engagement with them. They did this curatorial project. It had nothing to do with the curatorial project, but this was an archival project, a survey of the archive of Facet, which was the Swedish equivalent of like IBM, which was a business machines, adding machines, and office furniture company. And so Our Polite Society, Matthias and Jens had access to the archive, and they did this incredible book. And then they also did an exhibition which traveled to the Stedelijk, where they like really beautifully documented all this amazing print ephemera from Facet's career. And Facet basically doesn't make the transition to digitization, so they kind of fade away in the like late 90s, early, late 90s, I guess in the 90s. But this is an incredible archival project. And then a beautifully made book, like just the level of reproduction and the craft of the book is incredible. They went in and also revived typefaces from the company itself. And so my essay is sort of, which was interesting. I wrote the essay and they were like, we love the essay title. Why don't we just make the exhibition titled The Facet Model? And so it was a really good experience for me to like go in and kind of research. They sent me tons of primary information, primary material, and then sort of I wrote this sort of survey of like discussing the way Facet like fits in with the like larger history of sort of, companies like IBM and Olivetti, which have this sort of utopian, paternalistic kind of model. So this is just some images of the essay. But the other wonderful thing about this project is the essay didn't stop there. Our Polite Society have also a type foundry where they sort of publish their typefaces, which are very idiosyncratic and super amazing. And so the essay itself became like then a type specimen on the website for Our Polite Society type. So I really love these projects that have these like unexpected sort of loops in them where they like, you know, become writing, go into a book, are part of an exhibition, go back out and become like part of a type foundry. I just want to mention this one, Question the Wall itself, which was my first engagement with the Walker. This was like, the Walker's known for these omnibus shows, that big contemporary art shows. This one is about interior design as a critical tool within contemporary art. And so it included these installations that were sort of room sized, room scale, or use like decorative schema as like parts of their organization. And so these are just some installation views, but it was sort of organized around this Broteres piece. I'm a big Marcel Broteres fan. So the identity for the exhibition, for the catalog, and the exhibition identity was built out of this. I'll just show you some quick snaps. This was our research. This parrot appears in the show. Broteres, of course, very known for like stencils. And then I found the full color image of the parrot, which was like, you know, in public domain. And then Claude AM, Adrian Menard's then new typeface seemed perfect. And so used it both as display and text. And then ended up making the catalog. I'll just page through some spreads. Here's the Broteres piece. So this was amazing because I was in the galleries. I art directed all the photography, you know, every image, every spread. The pinking shears of a kind of like swatch book becomes like a motif of like how the images are, you know, presented on the page. I'll just go through a few of these. This was a essay by Rob Weisenberger on Jeanette Leverrier, and then Rob and I have gone on to do projects together, so I got to know Rob through this project. There was also an artist pages part of this book, which is like nice to try to take some of the artwork and like organize it for the page. And then I'll just focus a little bit on this. There was this beautiful Mark Camille Shamowitz piece in this show, which included kind of a wallpaper, and you'll see here like the original installation of that work. And then that Mark Camille had also done this like cut in the wall. And Mark Camille Shamowitz actually died very recently. And so I got to meet him, and he's one of my favorite artists. He's an incredible designer as well. And so it was very meaningful because we like borrowed this like diamond cut and used it as a kind of peekaboo element for the cover, because this show was all about interiority and interiors and sort of disclosure. And so the parrot made an appearance in a kind of trompe l'oeil fashion, and then we did this sort of peekaboo, you know, nod to Mark Camille. I like to point out the ribbons, which is like, it's the tail feathers of the book, and like had this sort of decorative excess as like part of the material quality of the book. Missing the Marble, another favorite. This was also kind of a family project. My partner Alex curated this. It was a group show at ICA. This is just one of those situations where everything fires on all cylinders and sort of reinforces one another. This is a show of artists dealing with sort of technologies and bodies, and it had a very strong color story. This is Florian Meisenberg, who did a paintings hung with a kind of VR project. On the left here, you'll see a little bit of a Sandra Perry piece and a Charrier and a Shot piece. So there was this strong sort of metallics, blue screen blue, fleshy pinks kind of color story in this book. I mean, in this exhibition. And so this is the Sandra Perry piece, which is now in like a number of museum collections. And then it also traveled to Oslo in Norway. So this is the Charrier and a Shot, like lighting up the Honey Anstad Kutzcenter at dusk in Norway. And the book, and I'll just show some spreads, is organized kind of around this idea of the terrazzo, where like an aggregate. And so gluing together the artists of the show, and then, you know, really using the kind of color story of the show and the materials of the artwork itself to kind of construct the book. And so just to show a few spreads here, extra fifth color to get these like incredible pops. a nice, play of metallics. And then Homai King is a film critical writer, teaches film at Bryn Mawr, and did an amazing essay. And so, yeah, I'll just give a few spreads of this. This just was one of these things where like all the pieces kind of came together. Still one of my favorite projects. And I went to Oslo and got to hang out with the artists. So it was like very special. There I am. Always put yourself in. This is a little bit of a sidebar just to show that like I'm not just doing work for art organizations and museums. I worked with Hassan Rahim and did the identity for Monkey Paw Productions, which is Jordan Peele's production company. Jordan Peele's creative director, Ian Cooper, is an artist and sort of came from the art world and is now a producer and sort of approached me to help with this. One of the things I did was like Gento Noir, Gento and like the type here. That was part of it. And then like worked with Hassan to create like a logo mark for them. And this was an interesting situation where we kind of created a kit of parts, which is like, you're using Gento, you're using this kind of like crusty, like Xeroxy treatment on the logo. And then it was amazing because like we made this logo mark and then all of a sudden it was like a neon sign in the office and it was on business cards and it was on t-shirts. And then, we made apparel sketches for them. And then an apparel was made. And then, it was spun off for like other projects and they made hats. And then what was amazing about this project is then, the elements we created like went in to inform their website and, the whole identity for the production company. So Folder Studio and Inventory Infoco have all worked really closely with Monkey Paw, but all the elements from the graphic identity we put in place are being used by like other designers. And so it's just been very gratifying to like have had like a hand in this. And I think even if you watch like one of their Amazon Prime shows, like the little sting at the end comes from like the identity materials that we created. Just again, just some of my favorite projects. This is a catalog for this exhibition at ICA Miami. I've done a number of books with them called Ettore Sottsass and the Social Factory, which is this really incredible, like thick workbook style, four-edge stained kind of brick of a book. The idea was to create a book that felt like a piece of furniture. And the exhibition was really interesting. And I'll just show a couple of installation views. Included things that you do know and then things you don't know. Later works, which I was really excited about. So of course it has the Memphis works, but then it also included a number of like later works. What I really loved about this exhibition is it's about Sottsass and production and the factory and like includes, you thought you knew everything there was to know about Ettore Sottsass, and this is like an entirely new argument about him. So like Ettore Sottsass between proto-situationism and post-sportism. And so, I love a book that tells you something new about an artist or designer. And so this book included like original working drawings alongside like images of the finished pieces. So you're really seeing like Sottsass in the factory, literally. And then of course, having done the Facet project, like this included a bunch of stuff about Olivetti, which I was really excited about. My Bloody Valentine, Ettore Sottsass and the Ready-Made Consumption. And so here you have the Valentine in like a Marcel Duchamp work. And it's like, I want to know what that argument is. Like, I've never thought about those two things together. So this was just a very gratifying project. I will, as a sidebar, say I did all the image management on this. I used the last stores of like Arcoprint milk. Sottsass's widow was about to cancel the project, and I made a working copy and four-edge stained it myself. And we FedExed a copy to Milan to get her to sign off on it. I photoshopped every one of the archival images and did all the image management myself. So it was incredible. G Marino, who curated it at ICMA Images, was incredible. And I've worked with Amanda Morgan there on a number of books. So very small team, but very gratifying. I'll just pause here. Like later in his career, like Sotsas is in his 80s dealing with like the pixel and making these like super weird furniture. So, you know, I started fell in love with the 90s Sotsas, which is like the Sotsas no one really knew. And so, you know, that's where this work on the cover comes from. So it's like, I don't know, it was very exciting to me because the object really summed up the whole project. This is another project. I think as designers, we often, our agency, we can become sort of like, it's not always about capital A authorship, like your agency is dispersed in different ways. I like to show this project, The New Black Vanguard, which I did with Rush Jackson and Antoine Sargent, who's on the right, who curated it, which is really a picture book, a survey of young Black fashion photographers, which was really connected, you know, quite closely to Instagram and sort of, you know, celebrity and all these interesting questions. And so, you know, we used an early cut of Margot Levic's Romy, which was really exciting. And then, you know, again, I think this is a project where like I was designing it with Rush and with Antoine. Like I wouldn't say, I don't know, the agency was dispersed, and it was also like really interesting because it was sort of, the design process was like narrativized in real time because like Antoine's very present on social media. So not only were we designing the project and meeting in New York and doing all that, but it was like, it was sort of also being narrativized, which was also really interesting. And then, you know, these are just some spreads from the book, you know, just one of these lavishly, almost unreal, I don't even know how it was printed. It's like kind of an unreal book in terms of its material quality. But what was quite gratifying is like the book moves like informed the exhibition design. So there's an exhibition that traveled. And then we also made sort of one-off covers for all the artists, which was super fun. And then, you know, it ended up traveling for like the better part of like a year or two. And so every so often I would get like a clip of like, it's at a new place, and like that visual language is being used in a different way. And then, you know, some in-house studio was like taking our typography and like using it in an unexpected way. So again, a project that was like, I think was like probably like had an incredible amount of visibility, but it was like, I feel like we did a book that kind of pushed a giant boulder off a hill that like rolled, you know? So it was very gratifying in that way. And Antoine and I will still like message each other sometimes. I love showing this. This is sort of the other swing of the pendulum, which was like Michelle Lopez, artist, you know, for a long time teaching at Yale, now at Penn, mid-career survey, rather modest volume, spent every dime on the material qualities of this book. Michelle works at Architectural Scale, this incredible installation of sort of powder-coated and twisted, it's called Ballast and Barricades. It's a little bit about political violence, this work, but has an incredible, just incredible formal quality, and is also like kind of dangerous and scary because it's like huge and suspended from like the rafters of the space. And so made this book that attempted to sort of capture like an uncapturable, like super bitty and detailed and material installation. So, you know, again, this was a project where like I probably photoshopped something on every page and helped crop and find every like moment in this with Michelle. I'll just page through. And then, you know, they're little material interventions. So just like a bright blue piece of paper, nothing printed on it, just like lands in the middle of the book. And then there was a curatorial essay, two curatorial essays, and a round table. And this was also really exciting because Aruna D'Souza wrote the essay. And so it was this just nice, like, again, contributing to the critical discourse around an artist. I'll just point, we had these amazing drawings, working drawings from Michelle, and we didn't know what to do with them. So they became kind of like pseudo, like marginal figures, which was really exciting. Like they ended up adding this sort of like texture to the book. It's still available. I highly recommend it. I pause on here because I'm just very proud of this as a book designer. The black is offset printed. The blue, orange, brown are silk screened with a white flood underneath. And then the type is foil printed. So, and it's on like this really incredible paper. So like, it just has this really amazing haptic, like material quality. I was like really, really pleased with the way this turned out. and worked like really like directly, with Michelle in it. Just another quick example of a book like that. This is Claudia Wieser. This just was all my favorite kinds of things. Claudia is a artist who's based in Berlin and does sort of decorative schema and does like applied art stuff too, but then also does these incredible sculptural objects that are sort of like referencing Bauhaus. Use this Paul Elliman typeface, who taught me, always wanted to use this Albernaut typeface, so found a reason to. And yeah, it's just another one of these books that kind of where all the pieces kind of hum and reinforce one another. Jennifer Carty at the Smart Museum was one of the curators, and Rachel Adams at the Bemis. And so I'll just show a few more spreads of this. This is another like where these synergies happen. Like there's a Barbara Kasten in the bottom left, right? And this is many years later. So when I got to meet Claudia later and have dinner with her, and she's wonderful. And so, yeah, just again, these visual arguments that sort of happen on the page, and just beautiful display moments that like really, again, help. It was a real battle getting the funky numbers in. Like, I want to use this font for the weird numbers. And then it has a kind of retrospective part at the end where you kind of look at sort of previous exhibitions. And then, of course, this also informed like the exhibition design in the show. Just a couple more. This is another ICA Miami book that I really love. Alan McCollum, who's a, very famous for the work did in the 80s. These pieces on the right, the framed pieces, I'll show you a little bit. So this was a survey of work in the 60s. The present, McCollum had not had a survey since like 2011 and had not had a new book in a long time. And so, of course, an artist that has a longer career is not making new work in the 80s, right? The work from the 80s is the work from the 80s. So it was a really interesting challenge to kind of bring these many disparate bodies of work together into a new form. And it really relied on like new photography. So really leaning into like exhibition photography that brought work from different time periods together. As well as sort of building like what I would call almost like a textbook kind of like framework for this project. So if you'll see these running rules, it is kind of like a textbook. Like every group of artwork has like series begun 1985. This is what it is. Very, very straightforward explanation of what the work is. But then you get these situations where like the rule that like anchors the textbook and the page numbers like live on top of the full bleed images as well. So again, just like so you get these funny pages like this where there's like page numbers and a rule on top of the installation photography. But it has this kind of feel of like an economics textbook or something you would have in school, which, it's like the last thing a designer like would pick, right? Which is like hardbound, gloss coated, like very, very textbooky. And I was really pleased with the way this one came out. This is for David. This is a project that David Wise and I worked on together for the Jewish Museum, sort of right before I started at Walker. Jonas Mekas is a very famous experimental filmmaker. This was a wild show of multiple screens, screening on different time frames. I'll give you just a sense. So these screens are flickering, and it was called The Camera Was Always Running, curated by Kelly Taxter. And it's kind of an impossible and perverse project, which is like, how do you capture in a gallery space durational film shot over many years, like by the hip, from the hip? It was really quite, and a whole person's life. So this was an engagement with an institution that included like exhibition graphics and then spatial design. And then there was a whole like information design component to this, because we had to make screens that told you what you were seeing, how long you had left, what screens were on. And so it was very challenging and rewarding in that regard. I'm showing this here. This is like the cover that David and I both liked, different covers out in the world, but I'll show a few spreads from the book. Mekas is very famous because he shot Andy Warhol's Empire. So I love spreads like this where you can like take durational film like Empire and just like basically run the same still twice. But then we created spreads like this, how do you capture on the page like dynamic cinematic experiences that are like in motion and constantly moving? And so this was just a very different kind of formal challenge, I think, for both of us. There's this kind of timing strip at the bottom that kind of is like almost like film timing strip that's like the running footer. But this was like very, very and I'll say one interesting thing about it is I had a little kid at the time. This is, I was being a dad, and so I was watching like Mikas live his life and raise his kids. We were scrubbing through hours and hours and hours of film. We made every screen grab that you see here, and living his life, and then like understanding my own like parenting journey. And it was also, it was just a very reflexive project. So I'm looping back around, 50 minutes in. I am going to hit the hour mark, I think, to talk a little bit about the Walker and kind of some projects I've done more recently. So just shy of 2 years ago, I got this job at the Walker in Minneapolis. This is a little glimpse of our campus. We have a beautiful 19-acre campus. It's beautiful this time of year, covered in snow in the winter. And as I told at the beginning, there's a, long history of design here. And so, at the Walker, I'm doing like a whole range of things, and I'm happy to talk about this in the Q&A, but I manage a team of 7, 4 designers, an editor, a copywriter, an image specialist who's an in-house photographer, Cam Herndon, who took this picture. And then we also have a content producer and a whole marketing department. So at the Walker, we handle everything for the museum, from exhibition graphics and publications to like merch, and the sign fell off the men's room that needs replacing. So it's every scale. I also manage at any given time like a handful of freelancers doing projects, and then of course do projects myself. So this is one of my favorite images. This is a recent tote bag that we designed in collaboration with the Oldenburg Foundation. We have a long-running Oldenburg estate. We have a long-running dialogue with Klaus Oldenburg. So, I've always loved this graphic. And of course, I'll just say, I've always been like a huge fan of the Walker and its exhibition program and its design. And so when I came to this job, I already knew, and I'm just going to name drop, I already knew the work of people like Chad Klopfer, Mylin, I knew the work of, Ryan Nelson. I knew the work of Dante Carlos. I knew the work of, going further back, Dan Etok came through the Walker studio. And then more recent people, Aaron Bites, who was recently at the Carnegie. So like and obviously Ben Schwartz. So these were all people I knew and were friendly with. And so, and had a great love for all the design work that has come through the Walker over the years, and have contributed to the blog, et cetera. So one of the first projects I worked on was the Ellipsis Lecture Series. And for that project, we looked back at the archive and looked back at some of the exhibition identities for the Walker, and created a kind of limited vocabulary based on like Walker typefaces. So all of these typefaces you see here, this is the poster, were drawn from historical examples of Walker exhibition identities. And so we use this as like almost like the drop-down menu for the whole identity. So you can only use these typefaces. And so, the Insights Design Lecture Series, very much on purpose, was like kind of a love letter to like the Walker design department and like my new role as a leadership here. And so, this is very much, very self-consciously, Yash Stefanski is another person who's done amazing work here. This was very much intentional. This was also, the theme this year was about identity, and the Walker's sort of been going through like an identity refresh and looking at identities. And so this is also a reflexive way to start talking about that. I want to show this slide just because the one on the left was made as a gigantic bus shelter. It's hanging behind me at my office right now. The one on the right we did not make, and I'm a little bit regretful, but I wanted to show it since I have like an opportunity to show a couple extra things. We also did this really great like social media sort of part of it where this was sort of the return to in-person lectures after being remote for a couple of years. And so, you know, using the social media kind of like DVD menu thing. And it was also meaningful. Like we had Prem Krishnamurti come, and Prem and I had been at school together and have been friends for years. Prem was kind of already on the list, but it was very meaningful for me to kind of start my career and my tenure here at the Walker with this kind of reflexive project that let me like both acknowledge like all the designers that I love and respect at the Walker, but also sort of like engage with people I've known for years. I also love to show this project because this was me really getting out of my comfort zone at the Walker and like using the opportunity of the Walker to kind of like explore a larger platform for design. I have a one-liner where I say like I have a lot of institutional experience, but very little institutional baggage. So every summer we have to do a summer campaign for the Walker, and the Spoonbridge and Cherry, and there's a giant blue rooster Hancock out in the sculpture garden, which everybody in Minneapolis knows. And I had always wanted to explore tabletop photography, and Ian Shiver, who's a tabletop or still photographer, incredible commercial photographer based in Philly and in New York. We had become friendly. We had friends of friends in common. And I was like, Ian, would you like to do a project at the Walker? And so we did a 2-day, 1-day photo shoot with props and we worked with this incredible retoucher, Zak Kyes, to create this this ad campaign. The image on the right was one of those sort of hero images. On the left, you see the actual prop cherry that was used and was fashioned. And then this is a little bit of the behind the scenes of like what it was like to make this thing, throwing water on props. And then this is just a snapshot of some of the images that were created. It was just really fun to work on this. Shout out to Newform for the Newform Sands, which is like that drove the whole campaign. And then we did amazing things. This is the cover on the left is by Andrew Bogart, our design fellow. And so it was really great to sort of be an art director and build these elements in a team, and then have my team take elements. So the right is the Walker magazine cover from that summer. And then on the left is like a day glow crazy magazine wrap that Andrew made. So it just really fun to like, again, like a different process that I'm used to working with. And then, one of the other wild things about the Walker is like, we're in a small metropolitan area of like 500,000 people in Minneapolis alone, Minneapolis, St. Paul, much bigger than that. And so to then have elements like go out in the world and like live in the world. So we do bus shelters, we do like bus elements. There's like a mini golf course on the roof in the summer. And then, crazy things like it's on the street, so that's really quite amazing. And then it's on a billboard, like at scale. So this was just like a scale and a kind of way of working that is like a place like the Walker lets you do, but is also just very different than what I'd ever done before. And so this has been one of the really gratifying things. We also have a gigantic wall that runs across busy Hennepin Avenue. And so like doing vinyl at like 2 or 3 stories tall is also really quite amazing. Ian, Brian, and Andrew from my team are pictured here for scale. I also want to talk about this, which is another, like, this is all within like the first year of at the Walker, is I worked with Ziga Teston, who is out of Australia, who's Slovenian, on this giant catalog for multiple realities, experimental art in the Eastern Bloc, 1960s and 1980s, created by curated by Pavel Pish here at the Walker. This incredible, like, omnibus, very Walker-y, gigantic, thick book, over 100 artists of work created behind the Iron Curtain in the Eastern Bloc. And just, working with Ziga was like incredible. Learned so much. We had like a 24-hour design cycle on this because we were on the other sides of the globe. And it's this wild Swiss-bound dossier that's drilled all the way through that includes these like prismatic, crazy, custom mixed, like psychedelic. So our concept for this was acid communism. So it's like work created in the Eastern Bloc, but then it has this like really surreal kind of, you can't really look at these pages, like these image breaks that are like incredibly like, just incredibly like blinding. So heavyweight types, Animo was like the display type. I'll just show some spreads here. Just, it was very nice. Like we drilled through the whole book block. So you got like plate images that had like drill holes through them, which was really amazing. Yeah, these incredible, like crazy, only could create on press kind of like image break pages. It's just, it has so much of Ziga in it. It's just like very interesting because there's a lot of me in here, but it was like such a collaboration. Kim Mum Hansen in Ziga Studio also did like incredible amount of work on this book. I love all of the like, just the weirdness of it, like the too closeness at the top. And we're just trying to telegraph all of these, like the idea of this book is like, it looks like the design was happened in phases, right? Like the bit of explanatory text was before, and then they type wrote something at the bottom, and then they like drill holes through it and bound it. So it's sort of like as if there was a dossier built around this, and then just wild things where like the type like runs around the like, we plan the type to like run around the drill holes. So again, like very different than my like lone wolf design studio, but like incredibly gratifying, and just I'm like so proud of this project. It was just yeah, everything about it was really amazing. And of course, because it's a Walker, all of this stuff goes back into the galleries. So this exhibition included like tons of didactics, these content rooms. So we created, Brian Huddleston in my studio did all the exhibition graphics. We created this like sort of agitprop, like Pravda-esque like wooden frame system. Ziga did help us do tons of research, and we did like maps, and then like there were like giant pipe on the wall, and then like these amazing like rooms where you had like print ephemera affixed to the substrate, and then things propped against the wall. So it was like both informal feeling and also really like, yeah, dynamic, and yeah, kind of like, it was kind of like an exhibition inside the exhibition. And then finally, like all these exhibitions at museums, we like created print ephemera. So, we were able to actually use a printer here in Minneapolis, Modern Press, to like match our crazy colors from the on press in Belgium, and create like a dinner invitation that was also like, it was also drilled so it could slide in, like as if you could bind it in with the book. It like slides in perfectly. And then we also did like out of home campaign, like including like an art format and like bus shelters and things. And then finally, I want to end with something that's like not Walker related, because like I'm very immersed in the Walker, and I'm quite happy to talk more about Walker stuff. But like, what am I doing for fun? What am I doing like outside the Walker? I still have a little bit of a studio practice where I'm like doing things on the side with other designers. And one of the things that's been really gratifying and fun is I've been doing like occasional covers with Melissa Weiss at Verso. And these, I want to just show these for fun because they're kind of what I really take a lot of pleasure in doing these. None of these covers were selected and made, but I just like grabbed a few of my favorites from the like, from my like sketches. I've only done about 3 or 4. There's one about to come out, it'll come out probably in another half year, but it's like been approved. So this was sketches for a book on drugs and American capitalism. It ended up being called Quick Fixes, but like they changed the name a few times. The illustration on the right are straight up, eye stock, but I really wanted to try to do something with like characters. So I had a really fun time like making that one. There was also this one, actually, the cover ended up being totally something else, but this was sort of about cryptocurrency and the tokenization of like, finance. So this Rachel O'Dwyer book, Tokens, but I loved making this one, and there were like so many good covers, so many fun ones. And then this was a more recent one that actually is out, the one on the left on extinction. I'm still mourning the fact that the big E didn't get to go, but this was another really, really fun project. The book came out pretty nice, actually. And then this one is actually in process. A Philosophy of Shame by Frederick Gross, but it was originally going to be called Shame, A Revolutionary Feeling. And I had this like red-faced marks that I was like really excited about. So I want to end with the verso stuff because it's sort of like to the side of what I'm doing at the Walker, but I did want to end with something that like is smaller scale and still very gratifying because I still think of myself as like a working designer, even though like I'm managing like a whole studio now. So I wanted to end with these. Let me see if I can get out of my sharing. Now we're back to the beginning. I'll break the spell. And yeah, stop sharing and take questions. I just kind of blaze through. Right at an hour, David. Perfect.
Yeah, great timing. I think like what we can do is we can just kind of open it up. People can unmute. We'll see. There's not a lot of people here, so maybe that'll work. But I wanted to start by asking one question, which is throughout the lecture, you talk about collaboration, partnership, like so much of your talk is like centered around people. So maybe you could like speak a little bit more to like the social aspect or like how integral the social aspect is to your practice and working with people, developing a network. Names are cropping up from project to project. And I don't think that that's just fully just by happenstance, like there's a defined social network around you. And I think
yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's like, well, there's two answers to that. One, up until I came to the Walker, I was like a lone wolf, like designing projects maybe with one other person. I mean, David, you were involved with me in that. And those projects are literally like, who's available? Who do I like? Who do I think I would be able to get along with? Who would be appropriate for this project? And like, who will do it for the like small amount of money we have to split? And so, I am a twin. My brother Matt is the partner at athletics in Brooklyn, and we're very close. And so I think I've always been in dialogue, like my whole upbringing. Probably, I've always had like a buddy there, someone to talk to. And so, and I came out of graduate study, an extended period, as an English major. So having a thinking partner and like, I work in a solitary way very often, and obviously a lot of the craft of design is solitary, but I do thrive on dialogue and those sorts of things. And then just from a practical standpoint, the collaborations with Neelis for like Barbara Kasten or Shannon Ebner, that was like Neelis was getting paid by the Danish government and needed a place to work, and like I hooked him up with an Airbnb, and then we like flew to LA, and it was like incredible, and we couldn't have been more different, but we had like such an amazing time. And so, I think those things are, in your working life, things kind of stitch together and one thing leads to another. And so that's part of it. I've also just been fortunate. We talked about this a little bit before the lecture, David. Things have cohered around certain things, like, had a certain like group that kind of cohered around it. I would say like Forms of Inquiry had a little bit of like an orbit of things around it. But like when you look back on it, a lot of that is sort of like by accident, and it's because it gets artifactualized in like a book or a journal. It feels like it feels like it's more of a thing than it really is. It's like there were no meetings. Like I didn't know half those people. Like there was a kind of synergy that wasn't really planned. And so I think those kinds of social network questions probably seem more real than they really were, or like more figured out than they were, certainly. I was happy to be, part of those conversations, but it's just interesting. I mean, I think I've just, gravitated towards people that I think were like kindred spirits or like were well suited to my temperament or were like could be fun to work with. And so that's been my kind of go-to is like finding interesting people to work with. And then, the writing has also had a kind of generative component. We loved your writing. Would you do something for us? That kind of thing.
Cool. Kind of piggybacking off where you ended, I was interested to hear how writing like directly influences your design, like stylistically or not, and if there's surprising ways you see it sneaking into your design.
I mean, there's two answers to that. I mean, I think of them as very parallel processes in the sense that like I'll have an idea, I'll like get it together, or like a research project that I'm kind of like working on all the time. I mean, the way it's typically worked through my career is like, I'm interested in something, and then like I kind of filter like the design work like through that constellation of interests, whatever it is. Music has been a little bit of a motif, but not an exclusive one. And then more recently, people have asked me to write things, and I've been like happy to write things for people. But I think they're related for me in the sense that like a design idea that you really feel has like potential, you work on it to like deliver it so it's like legible to an audience. And I really think of my writing as like very generous, and like I want people to get it, you know. And I also want people to appreciate like turns of phrase, or the way this anticipates that, or like the cleverness of the connection. In the same way, in the design work, you want the form and the content and the idea behind it to kind of bounce around in the right way and also be like legible to your audience. So what I often say is like, I'm kind of like a power chord designer. Like I'll pick 3 big moves: a type choice, a material choice, like a formal choice, a paper choice, you know, like 3 big things that are very clearly like design decisions, and then like let good design sort of take care of everything else. But like the intentionality is very clear in it. There's a certain clarity there. And I think my arguments, like the way I try to write the essays is A, entertain myself, but also like a certain clarity about just like with the writing and how it's delivered. You know, I was schooled in very, very theory moment in graduate school. Like I wrote, you know, I read literary theory for fun, still kind of do. And that can be really chewy at the level of syntax. It took me a while to like come up with a mode of writing that I felt was like lucid, clear, but included like and fun to read, but also like included like all the nuance and all that I want in the arguments.
Thanks.
I don't know if I have the chat open. I can always see if there's anybody.
Yeah, and people feel free to unmute.
I mean, it's 9 o'clock here. I'm probably going to do some emails. I don't know what I'm going to do after this.
Hey, Mark.
Yo, what's up, Nick?
Hey, I got a question for you about teaching, because
Yes.
when you went to the Walker, you left the teaching job, or part-time teaching job at least, I think.
Yes.
And I'm wondering maybe like what purpose that served in your practice before, or like what your balance was, and also maybe is it something that you miss and will go back to, or if it's something that you're happy to no longer need as part of your practice?
I mean, it's interesting. I was kind of a perpetual student. Like, you know, I knew the rhythms of the university, a seminar room I'm very comfortable in, slide lectures. Like I'm constantly, my mind is going constantly, like I always have ideas, you know. And so for me, it was twofold. Like, you know, I tell people like I was 6 years out of grad school before I stepped into a classroom. And the first class I taught was at Art Center, and it was design history. And I was like 2 weeks ahead of the students. I would literally go like, and I'd be like, constructivism this weekend. And I would like bone up on constructivism and scan a bunch of stuff. And then like the next week I would go give like the constructivism lecture, you know? And so like, I did not rush into teaching. I was in grad school for a long time. So I like knew what it was to do seminar papers and construct a syllabus and all that. But it was a while before I really taught design. And then I was fortunate because I taught a Friday class at Cal Arts, and they let me do whatever I wanted, and they didn't really bother me. And the students that want to take a seminar on a Friday, and rather than have a 3-day weekend, are already like a special breed of student. So I had like incredible students who were like down for the wild ride of a Friday seminar, you know. And I was also fortunate at that time, like I just had incredible people. Like Scott Berry was in my class, you know. It's like, who's like an amazing designer, you know. I had David Carwan, who's like now my parallel at LACMA, was like one of my students. So I had like this incredible group of Kate Johnston, who was one of the founders of the Center for Feminist Center for Creative Work in LA, was like one of my students. So, you know, it's just like a laundry list of like incredible people that I got to like teach, but also see work and all that. So I was just fortunate the other side in that regard, and it was like, but also like you have to imagine that was like 2008 financial crisis. Like it buoyed me up between the like lean times of studio practice. So like, I think like a lot of people, you know, like having that revenue stream from a class like helps you get through, bridge the gap between like projects and invoices and all that. It was also something I loved, getting out of the studio on a Friday and like checking out early and going and like engaging with students. And I always had like something weird that I wanted to teach or that I wanted to explore. And so when I lived in Philly, it was the same. You know, the other fun thing about teaching for me, it was like the resources. So like I could use the library and like, you know, I could use the facilities and like, you know, that was amazing. And it just kept me in dialogue with students. And, you know, there was a mentoring component, you know, helping students figure out what they wanted to do and all that was really generative. Do I miss it? Like to a degree, but like the Walker kind of threads together like all the strands for me. Cause it's like, there is the lecture series, there is a discursive part, there's a curatorial element to this. We're doing writing all the time. So like Ziga and I wrote about like the design of multiple realities for the like Walker website. And then my team, you know, they need, you know, I'm engaging them, right? And trying to support them. So there's a lot of that and a lot of dialogue in the studio. So like a lot of those skills that I learned, and of course, when you're in a room presenting design to like people who are non-designers, that's also helpful. So, you know, I miss it in some ways. I think, you know, I showed that little run of like syllabi, and like, I'm very proud of my teaching materials because they were like quite fun projects, and they're, you know, I loved writing them, and, you know, the student work was incredible. So, you know, I think the Walker stitches together a lot of what I'm interested in. You know, I was very close at many times of like getting a full-time teaching gig, and it never really happened. But I think, you know, I am getting a lot of that fulfillment from the Walker job. It's just a lot more all at once, you know, in a role like this with a big place like this. But yeah, I do miss it to a degree, but I also feel like all the teaching like prepped me for what I'm like sort of being asked to do now. Like this is a job where like every synapse and every creative reserve and every like intellectual like faculty is like being drawn upon like every day, you know, because you're going from like marketing meetings to planning meetings to an art history class to a design crit to like a curatorial project to a writing thing, you know, so you're constantly using all of your brain power. Are there any other? I thought people might want to know more about like what's going on at the Walker.
I personally would love to know like what's in store. What projects are you working on now?
It's interesting. I mean, all these institutions, arts institutions, really took a hit with COVID, and like it was a remote team for a long time, and like half the museum was closed down. And so it was a slow climb back to like getting people in the building and like full capacity. We've had this big Keith Haring show, which came from the Broad in LA up this summer, which has been a big crowd pleaser. And we're like through the roof in terms of people in the building. But, you know, through COVID and George Floyd and all that tumult, there was a lot of transition at the Walker. So institutions change. This is like a phenomenon of institutions. And then also like, you know, so there's been like new staff coming on and new ways of working, and like, you know, processes have changed. So a big part of my job has been, the first year was like staffing up and getting like things back up and running in a way with like a more complete team. So that's been big, and that's a whole learning experience for me. And then the other thing we're looking at, which we're going into like in the next 9 months, is like an identity refresh. I wouldn't call it like a rebrand, because it's not like a drop the curtain kind of moment. What we're doing, I mean, you have to think about it. It's like the last time the Walker really looked at its website was like 2011. You know, it's like social media, like we've become different. We've taken information very different, in a very different way from the blog era, right? From the long read era. And, you know, our wayfinding is like showing its age. You know, we have a very confusing set of two buildings smashed together. And so we're looking at all those things. and thinking about like upgrades, improvements, like how can we be more generous? How can we be like more audience oriented? While also keeping the like rigor of the shows and like the high design threshold that we have to reach. How do we balance all those imperatives? So that's a big thing that's going on at the Walker right now. And, we're on the leading edge of like a brand, like looking back at the brand and doing some like, website upgrades and wayfinding. We're also doing a facilities assessment. So looking at the building and thinking about things that can change there. So that's all super, super interesting, and very big things, which I've never really, I'm on a big team with other people looking at all that. And we're working with architects and we're working with, web developers. And so that's kind of what's coming up, which is very exciting. But it's also sort of like, yeah, it's, I'm used to exerting my own individual agency often, and getting into the details, which I still do, but, you have to delegate and you have to like take in a bunch of feedback. So, that's a big part of what's going on. The other stuff that's happening at the Walker that I'm super excited about is just like, not only the project my team's doing, like we just did a book with Tetsuya Yamada and Inventory Press that's incredible, that Ian Babineau designed. We're working on a fall campaign we just did a photo shoot for. That's super exciting. We worked with Julia Bourne on a Sophie Gall book, which is done and printed, and that's super exciting. So, all those projects that are kind of ongoing are also like really fun, but, floating above those day-to-day things are these kinds of like larger brand questions, which are just, they're broader and like really interesting to think about, and it's a little different than like closing the museum down for 6 months and doing a brand or something like that. Like it's sort of, the way I talk about it is like repainting and reupholstering your car while it's on the freeway. So it's like the momentum of the institution's going forward, and then we're like looking at all these things as we move.
Cool. Mark, it seems like we got a question in the chat.
Yes. What's it say? How do you choose projects to pursue and exhibits to curate at the Walker? Do you let things come to you, or do you seek out inspiring and compelling stories to bring to life? You might have already answered this a bit. Well, it's interesting. So we are the in-house design studio of the Walker. So we're like a service for the Walker. So we have like an Airtable project management system. We have like a design request. So anyone in the Walker can submit a design request, which is like, I need new business cards, or I need a catalog, or I need an exhibition design, or I need, whatever you need. I need a stanchion, whatever. And so we actually, and my studio manager, Ashley, like, we go through every assignment every week and like delegate those assignments, and they come with like deliverables and dates and all that. So in a way, it's like a very much like a normal studio in that way. And we don't have any control about like what's coming in terms of curatorial projects. That's what's in the programming queue, and we like plan ahead for it. And, I delegate those responsibilities and figure out the right designers to work on them. Or if we need an outside designer, do we resource it that way? So that's like one level of decision-making. For the curatorial projects, that's very different. That's like the studio getting together and being like, Insights is coming in March. Like, who do we want to invite this year? Like, what's a thematic that we might want to like wrap this around, And so that is much more of a dialogue, just in terms of like, what are you thinking about? What's of interest to you? And then we have longer term things, which is like, like there will be like a, another design exhibition, right? So that is also like a bigger conversation that happens with like our head of content and communications and our studio. It's like often those will include like an outside curator. So they're like bigger conversations of like, how's that going to go? Thus far, definitely working with on the insights have been really exciting, because you get to basically ask people with the like, the Walker has this long history of like design discourse. So you can ask someone that you have always wanted to know more about their studio or more how they work, and often they will say yes. So like I've known Alex Lynn for years and been a huge fan, but Alex is working in his studio. Like he doesn't go out of his way to do lectures, So to have the opportunity for him to come here and talk about his work is like very meaningful, because I know it's like not an insignificant like time commitment and all that. So, I've just been very gratified in terms of being able to kind of like have a voice and bringing those people. Leela Taylor, who's the creative director of the Brooklyn Public Library, is also an incredible writer, and has done incredible work, and that lecture is like very timely in terms of like institutions and publics and celebrity and how do you negotiate all these factors. And so, I think bringing people through the series that like you wouldn't necessarily expect. I think in previous years it's been a kind of like, they would be obvious, some of them, or like industry leaders, quote unquote. And I think more and more we're thinking about like people that like might be a little bit totally deserving, but might be a little bit unexpected. So we're really working around like doing something interesting with that platform.
Cool. If there's any last questions?
I don't know if anybody has anybody they really want to see come to Walker. We're gathering ideas.
Thanks, Zach.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, I'll be emailing you.
Cool. Well, appreciate you taking the time, Mark. Like you had mentioned, it is a very daunting and time-consuming thing to like prepare a lecture.
Yes. Well, luckily I had a bunch of stuff. I had a bunch of stuff together, but it was like, this is like a 6 gig keynote I showed. It's quite large. So, and again, the thing is with these lectures, the newer the work is, the like more poorly documented it is. So like all the amazing stuff the studio's doing right now, like we don't have good documentation for. So, there's a whole other lecture to be done, once all that stuff gets documented.
Part two.
Part two. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining. Our next lecture will be Roxanne Gray. If you're in Salt Lake, the lecture will be actually happening in person at Viz in downtown Salt Lake. If not, it will be live streamed. So mark your calendars for that. That is the 18th, so 2 weeks from today. Yeah, and again, thank you, Mark. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a nice night.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
See ya.